Hello everyone and welcome back to a brand new video. In this one, I'm going to be showcasing the absolute best controller settings for Warzone here in Black Ops Cold War Season 1. So of course guys, Season 1 of Black Ops Cold War is officially upon us, and of course there are a lot of big things when it comes to Black Ops Cold War in today's update, and one of the main things is of course that Warzone will finally be integrated into Cold War, making Season 1 of Cold War being the first major update for Warzone since Season 6 released for Modern Warfare at the end of September. And with that said, what I want to do for today's video is showcase the absolute best controller settings to use as you head into Warzone. And with that said, if you guys go on to enjoy today's video, make sure to leave a like on it down below, as well as subscribe and turn on those post notifications, that way you guys will not miss any of the latest and greatest Call of Duty news, class slips, and all kinds of things like that. Also, if you guys haven't already, make sure you comment down below what is one Cold War weapon that you're really looking forward to using in Warzone. Also, have you secured your first win on Rebirth Island? I'm really interested in knowing, so make sure you comment that down below. And with all that said, now that I got the intro out of the way, without further ado, let's dive right into the commentary. Now before we kick off the settings portion of today's video, I do quickly want to mention, and that is in Cold War there are a ton of different settings, and a lot of them really just come down to your own personal preference as well as what you are going to be playing on. For example, I play on a monitor, so that means my graphical settings are going to be a little bit different than if, let's say, I were to be playing on a TV. So in today's video, I'm just going to be talking about the crucial settings. And yeah, let's kick it off with the first setting being your sensitivity. Of course, sensitivity is pretty tricky because a lot of it comes down to your own personal preference and what you feel comfortable with. However, as I mentioned before, it doesn't matter if it's in Black Ops 4, Modern Warfare, or Warzone. When it comes to picking a sensitivity, what you have to do is start off with a base sensitivity, which is usually either a 3 or 4 sensitivity, and then you build up from there. Of course, generally speaking, a higher sensitivity is better as it allows you to make more precise movements. However, that does not mean crank up your sensitivity all the way to 14 or 20, because let's be honest, that's not really going to be helping you out all that much. But what I would recommend is once you're comfortable with the base sensitivity, try turning it up a notch. For example, if you're using a 4 sensitivity, try using a 5 sensitivity, then you get used to that, and then try a 6 sensitivity or a 7 sensitivity until you get to a point where you feel like you can't go any higher and you really start to feel comfortable with your sensitivity. Now, if you are going to be playing on console and you're just going to be using a standard controller, typically a 5 or 6 sensitivity will be working out really well for you, because that will be fast enough that you can really snap onto targets and do well, but it won't be too fast that you really can't aim at longer ranges, and won't be too slow that you'll have issues turning corners. And personally, that's the sensitivity I use. I run a 6 horizontal as well as a 6 vertical. And yeah, moving on down, let's talk a little bit about button layout. So at least for myself, I like to use a default button layout, and that's just because I have a PS4 controller. However, I use the PS4 back button, so that allows me to have 2 extra buttons on the back of my controller. And how I have it mapped is I jump with my left paddle and I crouch with my right paddle. But if you are just going to be using a standard controller, which I use for a very long time, I would highly recommend either one of the 2 button layouts, one of them being tactical and the other one being stick and move. So starting off with tactical, what we'll be doing is it will be swapping out the circle button for the R3 button. So that means instead of meleeing by pushing down on your right analog stick, you are instead going to be meleeing by hitting your circle button, and in turn you are going to be crouching and going into the prone position by pressing down on your R3 button, which is extremely useful as it will allow you to aim down sight, shoot, aim, as well as drop down into the crouch and prone position all at the same time, and will definitely give you a competitive advantage. Now our next button layout is of course going to be stick and move, which will be doing a very similar thing, being that we'll be swapping out the X button for the R3 button. So similar to tactical, instead of meleeing with your R3 button, you are going to be meleeing with your X button, and that also means in turn you are going to be jumping as well as standing with your R3 button, and this one is extremely useful, and even more useful if you were going to be playing games with XO movement, and as you can aim down sight, shoot, as well as keep your right thumb on your analog stick and aim and jump all at the same time. And personally, I use both tactical as well as stick and move extensively, and let me just say, if you're still using the default button layout, you'll definitely notice a huge improvement once you switch over and actually try out either stick and move or tactical. Moving on down to our next setting that I'm going to be talking about, and that's of course going to be the aim response curve type. Now of course, if you never touch this setting, it's going to be on the standard, which as the description reads, standard simple power curve map from aim stick to aim rate. However, I'm going to be changing that to linear, which as the description reads, linear aim stick maps directly to aim rate. The aim stick curve is the same as the aim rate. So breaking it down a little bit, if you are going to be using the standard aim response curve type, it means that when you are aiming using your right analog stick in game, it will appear to be a little little bit laggy, and it means that your aiming in game won't exactly match your aiming when you are moving your right analog stick. However, if you change it to linear, it's going to be lining up perfectly, and when I switched over from using standard to linear, I noticed that my aiming became a lot more sharp and a lot more precise. So now let's move on to our next setting, and that's of course going to be auto sprint. Now personally, I like to keep this enabled, and that's just because it's really just one of those creature comfort sort of settings where it's just a lot easier. All you have to do is just push forward on your left analog stick and you're automatically going to be sprinting, which is pretty useful and will also get you out of some sticky situations, especially if you are going to be playing Warzone, where typically you are going to be running around the map, especially if you're trying to avoid the storm. And of course, same thing goes for the parachute auto deploy, where I'm going to be keeping it enabled, so that way I know that when I'm playing Warzone, I never have to worry about face planting into the ground if I do not manually open up my parachute. So yeah guys, that's going to effectively wrap up the controller settings portion. So now let's talk a little bit about the graphical settings, and as I mentioned a little bit earlier in today's video, a lot of the graphical settings really just come down to your own personal preference as well as the screen that you are going to be playing on. However, there are a couple of settings out there that I do want to quickly talk about before I end off today's video, and the first one is of course going to be the field of view, which the field of view is a little bit tricky because a lot of it really just comes down to what you're comfortable with. If I'm not mistaken, the standard field of view is 80, and if you played any other Call of Duty game on console, that is the standard field of view in those other games. And even though the field of view really comes down to what you're comfortable with, personally I would recommend a little bit of a higher field of view, and that's just because when your field of view is increased, it allows you to see more of the map and take in a lot more, which is extremely important, especially if you are going to be playing Warzone. So that's why I like to use a 100 field of view, which is just about halfway between the standard field of view and the absolute max field of view that you can have. Trust me, I've tried 120 and I just find that to be a little bit too far out. So that's why I like to use a 100 field of view. Also keep in mind, if you are going to be playing on the standard variations of the last gen consoles, so the original 2013 version of the PS4 or the original Xbox One, you might have some frame issues if you increase your field of view, so just make sure to keep that in mind. And yeah, moving on down for our final setting, and that's of course going to be the motion blur, which let me just say, you're going to want to disable this if you haven't already. Of course, the obvious reason is if you disable motion blur, it's just going to make everything look a lot crisper. And really the main issue with motion blur, and that's if you are going to be looking around the map, of course your vision is going to be blurry, so especially if you are going to be playing Warzone with motion blur enabled, you might turn a corner and then your vision is all blurry and you might not spot a person who ends up killing you. So that's how come I would highly recommend disabling motion blur. And yeah guys, that's gonna effectively wrap up today's video. I hope you went on to enjoy it, and I hope you found it useful. And if you did, don't forget to leave a like comment down below, as well as make sure to subscribe and turn on post notifications so that way you guys will not miss any of the latest and greatest Call of Duty news, class clips, and all kinds of things like that. So once again, that's gonna effectively wrap up today's video. I'm your host, Deeper Jungle. I hope to see you in the next one.